America in the mid-1970s was about to be gripped by fear. On the surface, the country was thriving. People were living their everyday lives, going about their business. But beneath the calm exterior of this peaceful society, something sinister lurked in the shadows. A predator had begun his spree, and no one knew just how close he was, or how deadly his next move would be. Ted Bundy was an enigma, a man whose charm, intelligence, and good looks hid the most horrifying secret. He appeared to be every woman's dream, polite, respectful, a college-educated law student. But beneath the smile and the polite conversation was a killer, a man whose need for control would lead him to murder at least 30 women across several states. For years, Bundy fooled everyone. His victims never saw him coming. By the time law enforcement realized what they were dealing with, the terror had already spread across the nation. It was January 4th, 1974 in Washington state, when Ted Bundy first struck. The victim was Linda and Healy, an 18-year-old college student at the University of Washington. Linda was a bright and promising young woman, a beloved figure among her friends. But one winter night, she was gone, vanished without a trace. Her roommates noticed her absence the next morning, and an investigation quickly followed. The police discovered that Linda had been last seen in her apartment, and her belongings were still inside. The door was locked, and there were no signs of forced entry. It was as if she had disappeared into thin air. Months passed, and Linda's disappearance went unsolved. Then, weeks later, a chilling realization set in. Linda wasn't the only one. Another woman had gone missing under eerily similar circumstances. Donna Manson, a 19-year-old student from Evergreen State College, vanished in March of 1974. And once again, there was no trace of her. No witnesses. No clues. The police were stumped. The only connection between the two women was their age, their appearance, and the fact that both had disappeared without a sound. But little did they know, these were not just isolated cases. They were the first victims in a growing string of disappearances, all connected to one man. By the summer of 1974, several women had gone missing in the Pacific Northwest. The police were beginning to see a pattern. These were no random disappearances. Every one of the women had been young, white, and beautiful. The circumstances surrounding their disappearances were strikingly similar. The killer appeared to be targeting women in their late teens and early 20s, often in secluded areas where they were vulnerable. The police began to search for leads, but no one suspected Ted Bundy. At the time, he was just another young man in his 20s, handsome, intelligent, and with no criminal record. His life seemed ordinary, even perfect. But Bundy was anything but ordinary. Beneath his charming appearance was a mind capable of unspeakable horrors. The Zodiac-like pattern began to develop. Ted Bundy was methodical in his approach. He didn't attack recklessly. No, he studied his victims, choosing them with cold precision. He would often stalk them for days, watching them from a distance, learning their routines. Then, when the moment was right, he would strike. Bundy used his charm to lure his victims. He would pretend to be injured, perhaps asking for help with a broken arm or a flat tire, and once he had his victim alone, he would overpower them, taking them to a secluded spot where he would commit unspeakable acts. Ted Bundy's attacks grew more brutal with every kill. The way he would stalk his victims, the way he planned each murder to the smallest detail. It was as if he was playing a game, and each time he would get more confident. In the winter of 1974, Bundy's most infamous attack occurred when he lured Joni Lenz, a 19-year-old college student, to his apartment. He hit her with a blunt object and left her unconscious, but unlike his other victims, Lenz survived. When she awoke, she'd been brutally attacked, her skull crushed, her hands tied, and her body brutalized. But Lenz's survival was just the beginning. Although Bundy had thought his act of violence was foolproof, her ability to survive and her subsequent testimony helped the police start to connect the dots. She was able to describe her attacker's car, and for the first time, they had a lead. Yet, even as investigators started to close in on him, Bundy was still able to evade capture. His charm, his ability to blend into any crowd, allowed him to slip away unnoticed. He changed his appearance frequently, moved between states, and used fake identities. The police were no closer to finding him. They were chasing shadows. As the months passed, the public's fear grew. The press began covering the case, publishing stories of the charming killer who was on the loose. The media portrayed Bundy as someone who was methodical, intelligent, and deadly, someone who knew exactly how to get away with murder. In 1975, after a brief relationship with his girlfriend Elizabeth Klopfer, Ted Bundy's horrifying crimes came to a head. He had grown more brazen. He abducted Karen Sparks, a 19-year-old student, from her apartment. She survived, but she could no longer recall what had happened. Her testimony was the first real evidence that could tie Bundy to the crimes. But even with all this new information, Bundy remained a step ahead of the authorities. The more the police investigated, the more they realized that Bundy was the perfect predator. He blended into his surroundings, didn't raise any suspicion, and always seemed to have an excuse for his behavior. The investigation became a game of cat and mouse. But Bundy made a critical mistake. He returned to Utah, where he had once lived. He was spotted by a police officer who, on a routine traffic stop, noticed Bundy's suspicious behavior. The officer, who had recently been briefed on the details of the Bundy case, pulled him over and searched his car. Inside, he found ski masks, ropes, and a crowbar. Bundy was arrested. As Bundy stood trial for the murders of at least 5 women, the full extent of his evil came to light. But there was still much the public did not know. The brutality of his crimes, the psychological torment he had inflicted on his victims, was just the surface. The true horror was still to come. Ted Bundy had been arrested, but the terror he unleashed across America was far from over. As his trial began, new revelations emerged that shook the nation. Bundy, the seemingly polite, charming man, was now revealed to be one of the most ruthless serial killers in U.S. history. But this was only the beginning. His manipulations had only just started. In prison, Bundy remained calm, almost eerily so, but the world couldn't turn away. The nightmare that had plagued the country for years had a name: Ted Bundy. And now everyone was waiting for the final act of this twisted drama. As Bundy stood trial for the brutal murders of at least 5 women, the courtroom was packed. The media frenzy surrounding the trial was unlike anything the country had ever seen. Cameras clicked, reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks, and the public sat on edge, wondering if Bundy would finally reveal the truth behind his horrific killing spree. The prosecution presented an overwhelming case. The victims' families, young women with bright futures, sat in the courtroom, their faces a mix of grief and anger. The chilling details of Bundy's crimes came to light. The methodical planning, the brutal attacks, and a complete lack of remorse. But Bundy still maintained his innocence, despite the mounting evidence. Bundy's charm, however, didn't work on a jury. He sat through the trial with a cold, almost detached demeanor, as if the events unfolding around him were mere distractions to his ultimate goal: to manipulate and control the narrative. Bundy, the man who had once charmed his victims, now tried to charm the court. He took the stand in his own defense, a shocking move that allowed him to speak directly to the jury. His words were calculated and delivered with an unsettling calmness. He denied the charges, claiming that the evidence against him was fabricated, that he was the victim of a grand conspiracy. But despite his best efforts, the evidence was undeniable. His fingerprints, his DNA, and the physical evidence found at the crime scenes all pointed to one man: Ted Bundy. As the trial came to a close, it became clear Bundy was not just a killer. He was a master manipulator, and the truth was finally within reach. But just when it seemed like Bundy's reign of terror was over, something even more shocking happened. On June 7, 1977, while awaiting his trial in Colorado, Bundy made a daring escape from a courthouse. Using his knowledge of the system and his ability to blend in, Bundy managed to slip past his guards, disappear into the wilderness, and vanish once again. For weeks, the search for Bundy was intense. His escape ignited nationwide fear. The killer who had terrorized the country for years was free again, and this time, the authorities were determined not to let him slip through their fingers. Bundy didn't waste time. He fled to Florida, where his killing spree would continue. He shaved his head, altered his appearance, and blended into a new environment. But no matter how far he ran, the police were closing in. Bundy knew his time was running out. In Florida, Bundy struck again. On January 15, 1978, he entered a sorority house at Florida State University in Tallahassee, committing 2 brutal murders. Lisa Levy and Margaret Bowman were the victims of his savage attack. He broke into the house in the middle of the night, attacked the young women while they slept, and left them for dead. It was his most brutal attack yet, leaving the community reeling in shock and fear. Bundy's escape had fueled his rage. He knew he was being hunted, and he knew that his time was limited. The police had put out a nationwide manhunt for him, but Bundy's ability to evade capture was almost supernatural. He was always one step ahead, always watching, always calculating. As the bodies of his victims piled up, the authorities grew desperate. Bundy had changed his tactics and his appearance, but his methods remained the same. He was a master at evading capture, but he was running out of options. On February 15, 1978, Bundy's luck ran out. He was finally captured after a routine traffic stop. A vigilant police officer, who had been briefed on the manhunt, recognized Bundy's car from the description. When Bundy was pulled over, the officer noticed something suspicious: a ski mask, rope, and a crowbar in the back seat. Bundy's heart must have raced in those final moments, knowing that his freedom was over. The authorities finally had him. The man who had once evaded capture with ease was now in custody, and his reign of terror had come to an end. But the arrest was just the beginning. Bundy would go on to confess to more than 30 murders, though investigators believed the true number was likely higher. His calm demeanor, his eerie lack of remorse, sent chills down the spines of those who listened to his confessions. The trial of Ted Bundy was one of the most publicized and sensational in U.S. history. It was televised across the country, and millions watched as a charming, intelligent man in the courtroom revealed the true horrors of his crimes. The victims' families waited for justice, and Bundy's twisted mind was laid bare for the world to see. Bundy's confession was chilling. He admitted to the murders with disturbing calmness, describing each act in gruesome detail. He told the jury that his need to kill was something he couldn't control, and in his eyes, the victims were just obstacles in his path to achieving satisfaction. But even as Bundy confessed, there was still one more twist. He revealed that his killing spree had not been a random act of violence. It was a calculated series of murders driven by something much darker, something that had been festering in his mind for years. As Bundy stood in the courtroom, the chilling realization set in. There were still many unanswered questions. Bundy's confessions, though brutal, didn't explain everything. There were still victims whose identities remained unknown. There were still questions about his motivations, about the true extent of his crimes. Then, in the final moment of his trial, Bundy made a shocking statement that would send ripples through the investigation. "I didn't just kill them. I wanted something more. There was a reason, and you'll never understand it until you see what's coming next." What did Bundy mean by this? Was he hinting at something even darker, something that no one had uncovered? Had he been part of a larger plan, something far more terrifying than anyone had realized? Ted Bundy's capture marked the end of one reign of terror. But even as he sat behind bars, the questions surrounding his crime seemed to multiply. He had confessed to killing at least 30 women, but authorities suspected the true number was higher. And yet, despite his confessions, something didn't add up. Bundy's calm demeanor in the courtroom, his refusal to show remorse, and his chilling statements left investigators wondering. Was there more to his story than he had let on? Even in the quiet of his cell, Bundy's mind was still calculating. His desire for control, his manipulative behavior, and his ability to stay one step ahead had made him a master of deception. But what did he mean when he claimed that there was something more, something that no one would understand until it was too late? Could there be another piece to the puzzle? Or was Bundy playing his final, most twisted game? As the weeks passed after his arrest, Bundy continued to confess to more and more murders. Yet there was something unsettling about his confessions. They were never complete. Each time he spoke, he would leave out crucial details. He would describe the killings in graphic detail, but he rarely mentioned the motives behind them. His explanations seemed hollow, as if he were merely recounting events rather than expressing any real understanding of his actions. Detective Sarah Turner, who had been part of the investigation from the beginning, was becoming frustrated. She had been at the forefront of piecing together Bundy's crimes. And now, she was staring at a mountain of confessions that didn't explain everything. She knew that Bundy had to be hiding something. There were women who had vanished, their bodies never found, victims whose names didn't make it into the headlines. Bundy had confessed to killing young women across multiple states, but some of the bodies were never recovered. How could he have hidden so many bodies without anyone noticing? The more Sarah thought about it, the more she realized that Bundy had a terrifying ability to blend into his surroundings. He wasn't just a killer. He was a master manipulator, someone who could walk through life unnoticed, carefully choosing when and where to strike. In 1980, Bundy began to agree to extensive interviews with law enforcement and psychologists. He was approached by a team of investigators hoping to understand the mind of a serial killer, hoping to uncover the true motivations behind his horrific actions. But Bundy's demeanor during these interviews was chilling. He wasn't angry. He wasn't remorseful. He was, in a way, detached, more concerned with his image and how he was being portrayed than with the lives he had taken. He was careful with his words, always twisting them just enough to avoid full accountability. He wanted control. Even now, during one interview, he told the investigators, "You think you know who I am, but you're only looking at the surface. The real truth, the real answer, lies beneath." Every time they pushed him for more details, Bundy would deflect. He would turn the conversation back to himself, shifting the focus onto his own narrative rather than offering any new insights into the killings. The more they tried to understand his motives, the more elusive he became. Bundy had a way of playing the game. His ego, his need for control, was what kept him one step ahead. He knew that as long as he kept the investigators guessing, he maintained the upper hand. The authorities had his confession, but the missing pieces of the puzzle, the victims whose names would never be known, the places he had hidden his victims, remained unsolved. In late 1981, Bundy shocked everyone when he made an unexpected phone call to Detective Turner. The call came late one night, and the voice on the other end was eerily calm. "I've been thinking," Bundy said, his voice soft but calculated. "I think you're looking in the wrong places. You'll never find the last ones. They're buried somewhere you'll never look." Turner's heart raced. The phone call was strange, out of the blue, and felt like an invitation to play his game once again. Was he taunting her? Or was he finally going to reveal the last hidden secrets of his reign of terror? "What do you mean, Ted?" she asked, her voice steady despite the rising tension. "What do you know?" "I know where they are," he replied, "but you'll never find them." The line went dead. Bundy hung up, leaving Sarah in a cold sweat. What had he meant? Which victims was he referring to? Were there still women out there, lost, their bodies hidden in plain sight? Or was this just another cruel mind game, a final attempt to toy with the authorities? The call haunted Sarah. Bundy had always been one step ahead, always pulling the strings. Was this phone call a clue? Or was it just another layer to his manipulative psyche, a desperate attempt to control the narrative one last time? Despite the chilling phone call, the authorities were no closer to finding the missing victims Bundy referred to. But in 1982, a break came when new forensic technology allowed investigators to revisit old cases. They began combing through Bundy's known locations, re-examining old evidence with fresh eyes. This new wave of investigation led to the discovery of additional bodies, hidden in areas Bundy had frequented during his killing spree. But there was something unsettling about the discovery. These weren't the victims Bundy had confessed to. They were newer, and their remains were in places Bundy hadn't mentioned. It was as if he had left them behind on purpose, as though he wanted someone else to find them. Or worse, he had planned for the investigation to go cold. The public's reaction to these new findings was a mixture of fear and disbelief. Bundy had been sentenced to death in 1979, but his twisted legacy seemed to have no end. Even after his conviction, there were new revelations, new bodies, and new mysteries to unravel. The letter contained a chilling message. "You've been looking at the wrong man. You've missed the real story. There are others, and they're still out there." This cryptic letter raised more questions than answers. Who was this person? Was it a copycat killer? Or was there another twisted figure lurking in the shadows? Someone who had been inspired by Bundy's reign of terror? And most terrifying of all, How many more victims were out there, still waiting to be discovered? As the clock ticked down on his remaining days, Bundy's manipulations were at their peak. He had spent years playing the part of the charming, polite man, someone everyone trusted and believed. But now, confined to a cell on death row, his demeanor had shifted. Gone was the calm, calculating man who had evaded capture for so long. Instead, there was something darker, something almost desperate in his eyes. On January 24th, 1989, as Bundy prepared for his execution, he agreed to one final interview with the authorities. This time, it wasn't just about his crimes. It was about his legacy, his twisted need for recognition. For the first time, Bundy seemed willing to fully confess, not out of guilt, but because he had a twisted desire to control the narrative of his story. "You have to understand something," Bundy began, his voice eerily calm. "I didn't do this because I was crazy. I did it because I wanted to feel powerful, because I needed it. It was like a drug, a high I couldn't stop chasing. And every time I took a life, it was like the world fell away and I had all the control." The investigators, who had been exposed to Bundy's terrifying mind for years, sat in silence, listening to his words. They had heard his confessions before, but this was different. There was something chilling in the way Bundy spoke now. It was almost as if he were savoring his final moments of power, relishing the fact that he was still in control, even as his fate was sealed. "The truth is, I didn't need a reason," he continued. "I wanted to do it. I could have stopped, sure, but I didn't want to. That's the part most people don't understand. There was no motive. I didn't hate them. I just needed to kill. It was as simple as that." Bundy's final confession didn't reveal new details about his crimes. Rather, it confirmed what investigators had long suspected. Bundy had killed simply because he could. He had no remorse, no guilt. In his eyes, the women he murdered were nothing more than obstacles in his twisted quest for power. But there was one final bombshell Bundy dropped, one that no one had expected. "There's one thing I never told you," Bundy said, his eyes flickering with a strange mixture of amusement and bitterness. "You think you know everything about me, about my victims, but there's one last secret you've missed. It's not just about killing. It's about what comes after. I left a part of me behind in every victim." The investigators looked at each other in confusion. What did he mean by what comes after? Bundy's words were cryptic, but they hinted at something far darker than anyone had considered. Bundy's face twisted into a dark smile. "You'll never find all of them. Some of them are still out there. You'll never know which ones. You'll never know where I've hidden them. That's my final victory." The investigators were left in stunned silence. What was Bundy hinting at? Had he left more victims than they realized? Had he buried bodies in places no one had thought to look? Or was this just one last attempt at manipulation, a way for Bundy to assert control, even as he faced the ultimate consequence for his actions? As the day of Bundy's execution drew closer, the nation watched. His final moments were broadcast to a public hungry for closure. But Bundy, ever the manipulator, didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing him broken. Instead, he remained calm, even eerily collected as the execution began. His final words, spoken just before he was strapped to the gurney, were chilling. "I'd like you to understand. I wasn't just a man who killed. I was someone who took pleasure in seeing the world burn. You think you've caught me, but you'll never catch the others. I've already won." With those words, Ted Bundy's life ended. As Bundy's death was confirmed, the world seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. The man who had terrorized the country for years was finally gone. But as investigators looked back on his case, they were left with lingering questions. Bundy's final words, his confession, and the new leads he had left behind cast a shadow over his execution. Was he truly the only one? Had Bundy been working alone? Or was there more to his story than anyone could have imagined? Despite his death, Bundy's influence lived on. The public's obsession with him didn't fade. His name became synonymous with pure evil, and his twisted game of manipulation continued to haunt those who had studied his life and crimes. Years later, detectives still refer to Bundy as a perfect example of how evil could hide in plain sight. They continued to investigate cold cases, searching for answers to questions that Bundy had left behind. Questions that would likely never be answered. Just as authorities thought they'd close the book on Ted Bundy's reign of terror, a strange letter arrived at the FBI's headquarters in Washington, D.C. It was postmarked from an unknown location. The letter contained only one line. "You never really caught me. I'm still out there. You've been looking in the wrong places." With Bundy's death and the mystery of his final words still looming, investigators were left with more questions than answers. Had Bundy truly been working alone? Or had his reign of terror been part of something bigger? Something more insidious? Watch out for part 2. It's coming soon.